Hello, everybody. Welcome to Horror 101 with Dr. AC. My name is Aaron Christensen, and today we're going to be talking about an entire genre of film I didn't even know about called the Yokai Monsters. There were three films that from 1968 to 1969. There were three films that were generated in that time period, and then there was a remake in 2005 directed by Takashi Miike. And Arrow Video has recently put out a box set of these films. And my friend Dave Kosanke and I are going to be chatting about them today. Come on in, Dave.
There I am.
How are you, man?
I'm doing good.
So had you heard about the yokai before? Was this, I feel like I got this from Arrow and I was like, I don't even know what a yokai is. I know what kaiju is and I know what tokusatsu is, but I had never heard of the yokai.
Yeah, interesting. As much as I knew about the Japanese monster film, like you said, the kaiju and everything, I was not familiar with yokai either until this set. You know, I felt like this set educated me enough to where I was like, okay, now I know kind of where that's coming from. But prior to that, hardly any info.
Yeah, there's a great documentary before we get into the films themselves. Like the package itself is it's a great kind of introduction to yokai. And on the first disc, there is a great little documentary. It gives you a nice background of what the yokai are and the inspirations and the influences they've had over the years in Japanese culture. You come to find out that the yokai are they're creatures from Japanese folklore. And they were popularized in the 20th century by a manga artist named Shigeru Mizuki. He had come up with this series of comic books where he started creating these, bringing these yokai to life in comic book form. And from those came these films from 1968 and 1969. The first film is called 100 Monsters, Truth in Advertising, because there's a whole lot of monsters in that one. And then Spook Warfare, which is also known as the Great Yokai War. And then the series wrapped up with Along with Ghosts in 1969. So the Yokai Monsters collection that Arrow put out, it has the first film, 100 Monsters on it. We'll go ahead and start with that one. Dave, do you want to try a stab at the synopses on this?
The 100 Monsters kind of like threw me down a familiar path. Anyone familiar with the studio, Dai Studios, known mainly for the Gamera series, but also known for the Daimajin, which is the giant statue god. And going into 100 Monsters, it felt very similar to the Daimajin in that you've got like taking place, I don't know the time period exactly, but it's more like the feudal Japan where it's everyone's carrying swords. And in this instance, the similarities are a group of people being oppressed by a governing body of these other warriors that want to take over. And in this instance, it leads you down a path where they sit around a table and they talk about these stories about the creatures, the yokai. So initially, you might go in thinking, well, this might be a flashback thing. It could be like an anthology. Mm-hmm. They're going to relate a story, and then you're going to go and then everyone will play out the story. And granted, that happens in one sequence. But then the film kind of veers off into another area. But essentially, what to break it down and make it simple, is it's a curse. Mm-hmm. These men are cursed. And some of them blow it off, nothing's going to happen. Or the other one's like, no, you need to finish this because if you don't do this, there will be repercussions. And then that's essentially, I believe, kind of a theme that runs in at least for the first three, but much more so in the first one where they introduce you to this thing and everyone like presents it as a curse. So where the ghosts, apparitions, and monsters themselves are cursing these men.
Right. Well, there's a whole ritual involved with it, right? And it's funny you bring up the Daimajin because our screenwriter and our director of the first film are both they both did the original Daimajin. Tetsuro Yoshida is the screenwriter. He did all three Daimajin films, and Kimimoshi Yasuda did the first 100 Ghosts, and he did the first Daimajin film. These films, they are monster movies, but they're kind of juvenile monster movies in the way that Gamera films became very juvenile and definitely geared toward younger audience. Same for the Daimajin films. I remember seeing those for the first time. Like, these are basically kiddie movies. And these films, I would say they're kind of a middle ground. There's a lot of like stuff that's going to appeal to younger viewers, but I think there's also some adult themes running through it as well.
I think with I agree with you that runs through it a lot of the more stuff geared for kids. But I think in this instance, as with a lot of the stuff from Japan, is you need to put like a little asterisk by it and say, well, this is Japanese culture.
Right.
So their idea of something geared towards kids is not the same as it is in America.
Yeah.
So you have to like understand a little bit about the Japanese culture. I mean, you still have guys getting shot with arrows, getting sliced with swords. I mean, there's still violence in these films. Yeah. That if you would transport that to, let's say, the same time, let's just say like the Batman TV show from the 60s, you'd never get away with that in America. It would never fly as something geared towards kids.
For sure. The narrative, at least in the first one, the narrative's a little loose, and I don't know that kids would necessarily follow it.
Right.
And that's I was actually kind of surprised because I was looking back and trying to think about like what the storyline was for 100 Monsters after seeing the other three. And I was like, wait, what happened in that movie? I feel like it's the least narratively driven in terms of something that you can follow in a straight line. The next two are much more straightforward, and the final one, the Great Yokai War that Miike did, it's very sprawling, but I would say that it does kind of follow a straight line. You kind of the narrative is fairly straightforward.
Yeah, I agree, and it's more or less the Miike one is more or less a kind of a more of a loose remake of Spook Warfare, anyways. And Spook Warfare, yeah, it does have the beginnings of the, like you said, more of a plot that you can follow. Because again, with 100 Monsters, you think like it could be, I said prior, an anthology that they're just going to relate stories, and then it kind of jumps around a little bit. So yeah, it most definitely is hard to follow. But I think the key element for me that worked, especially in 100 Monsters, is the atmosphere, the whole vibe. Even though it does have more of, like you said, a juvenile feel, but it still has a spooky, creepy atmosphere.
Yeah. Because
especially once you see the monsters come in and it's definitely again, it's the Japanese version of what might be here, but I think again, little kids could be creeped out by it, if they don't know what to expect.
So tell me really, I mean, like once you finally do get to the monsters though, I feel like that's what we came to see. We came to see 100 Monsters, and again, truth in advertising, we get a whole lot of monsters, and they're of a great variety.
The imagination, especially probably the one that everyone's going to remember right away, is the umbrella monster with the big tongue. I mean, you're looking at that like that completely comes out of like left field. Like what are we looking at? And then it's making like this slurping like sort of noise with the tongue. That is like, oh, and then the other one, the big creepy one with the woman with the head, where her neck elongates and it just becomes like a snake or whatever. That's just like unbelievable, especially how they pull that off. It's done remarkably well.
I agree. Like the special effects for that one, because you see kind of like the shape moving, and then there's kind of like a little screen, and you see the actress's face come around the corner. I was like, that was really good. And I feel like I'd seen that long-necked woman in other media in some form, because it wasn't a complete surprise to me, but I was really impressed with how they pulled it off. Again, especially with 1968 technology.
Right. I agree.
Let's move on to Spook Warfare, which is, again, like I say, a little bit more straightforward. There is a Babylonian, want to say vampire, is unearthed by these guys who are like breaking into a grave, and the creature eventually ends up taking over the spirit of a lord, and basically like takes on his form, and so he's masquerading as the lord. This demon is masquerading as the lord in his household, and what we find is that not like a vampire, when it bites somebody else, it becomes like a duplicate. It's like they start cloning, like taking over the village one by one. They're like body snatchers, basically.
Right. That idea actually reminded me right away of Mario Bava in Black Sabbath, the Wordalax segment.
Yeah.
Boris Karloff. That's the first thing that came to mind to me. I'm like, that's very similar. someone like a character will come as all nice and like caring, and he goes outside, he gets bit, he comes back in, and he's like,
Right.
you need to destroy this, these religious symbols and all this and that. And they're like, wait a minute, you just said before, it's like they become a completely like evil person, like literally, like that.
Right.
And then, like you said, it spreads, and it's like this vile, like evil influence. I think it's called like Daimon, or what Daimon is the evil like apparition in this one. So.
And we see in this one, there's a yokai called Gappa who shows up, and it's basically the inspiration for the Ninja Turtles.
Right.
It's like, like it's a turtle spirit fairy type thing. The actor is wearing like kind of a beak nose and a shell on its back and painted green. But he's very feisty, like he wants to fight, but he's not equipped to fight this powerful demon. And so he goes off to recruit the other yokai, and they all come back and they team up and basically, fight the Great Yokai War.
The thing for me was when I see the water imp, the Gappa, and he comes out and he starts talking. But right away, that lends us a whole different vibe versus how 100 Monsters is, where they're more like in the background and they don't really talk. They're
Right.
more just like there, and they're more creepy and atmospheric. Whereas in this one, as soon as they start talking, then it leans more down the juvenile route. It's the difference of like Godzilla, King of the Monsters versus Son of Godzilla. Like right away, like as soon as you see him come out of the water and he starts talking to the rest of them, then it's like, okay, all bets are off. This is a completely different film as 100 Monsters was.
Well, and there's a kind of like children's theater vibe to it at that point.
Absolutely.
Like it becomes like it's a broader performance. He's definitely kind of like goofy and wacky and spirited. And you go, okay, cool. I can see that the younger kids are immediately going to identify with him. And Gappa apparently was one of the most popular yokai. He showed up in a lot of different media. But I really did find that I found Spook Warfare very entertaining. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Indeed. It was just, like I said, a completely different vibe. So, I mean, it's not like they were content to just remake the same thing again. They went a completely different route.
That's right. And you had said that offline, but yeah, it's not like they made the same movie over and over again. Like we have three very different movies that all feature the yokai in them.
Exactly.
And that brings us to our third one. And I mean, this film, along with Ghosts, was released 12 months after the first one. Like they just came boom, boom, boom. They said, okay, well, we got all these yokai sitting around. We better make another movie. And along with Ghosts, it was probably my favorite of the three in terms of a narrative, because it's a very strong narrative. It's the idea of a young girl who is trying to be reunited with her father, and like a brave samurai Ronin is kind of the one who's going to shepherd her on her way. And there's a yakuza who has, he's murdered somebody on sacred ground, and that's what inspires the yokai curse. And so you've got the curse that's pursuing the yakuza, and we've got this young girl who has witnessed the murder and has.
Yeah, it was like the documents where they were trying to ambush this guy, and
they were trying to get from him.
Yeah, right.
And so she has the document, or at least she saw the document, but they think she has it. So they know that they have to find her, and they have to silence her by whatever means necessary. And the whole thing becomes kind of a road movie of, her trying to find her long lost dad, and the yakuza trying to catch her, and this Ronin trying to protect her.
Right. It's interesting in this one because, again, the theme, the ideas, the atmosphere, again, it veers wildly, especially from Spook Warfare, because in this one, they went a full like 360 and said, well, instead of like bombarding you with monsters, we'll keep them like way over here. I mean, it's almost like 40 minutes before you even see anything.
That's right.
Resembling, one of the monsters. So it's like they're really kept in the background in this one, and essentially what they do is they let the story kind of like unfold at more of a leisurely pace, which could be a turnoff to some potential viewers because they may be expecting more action or more monsters. But then again, if you're patient and you enjoy a plot, and especially one led by essentially like a 7-year-old girl, that adds another layer that again makes it very interesting and unique, specifically to this film, that draws your attention and completely different from like what the other two had.
It's kind of an adult atmosphere. I mean, we're taking on some pretty adult themes, like they're trying to kill this little kid. And then there's like these dice that she is instructed to show to her father, and he will recognize her, by them. And it turns out these dice are made from her mother's bones. And I was like, wow, that's creepy.
Right. They add that, and they also add the whole scene where they're basically gambling, and then they're saying, we'll call it, is it odd or even? And then they're basically saying like, oh, these are fixed dice. I mean, people who are like gamblers will obviously get a kick out of all this.
Yeah, agreed.
It's all like all these different layers and all these different themes, and especially with something like that, it is definitely something more adult. But yeah, and then not only that, but then when you find out who her father actually is, it's again, it comes out of left field. You wouldn't expect it.
Right. Agreed. But what it does have, it's like, oh wow, there's a nice emotional payoff on that.
Yep, absolutely.
So before we jump ahead to the Miike film, what was kind of your overall view of these three features? Again, I had never seen them, didn't know what to expect, and I was kind of surprised. And my wife and I were watching 100 Ghosts, and she was like watching these these monsters all kind of jump and cavort, and it's like she's like, this is so kind of like fun and wild and out of left field, and I know that we enjoyed it quite a bit, and I enjoyed kind of being immersed in the world of the yokai.
Yeah, me too. And again, being familiar with the Dai Studios output from that decade of the 60s,
right?
That's also a huge help because it fits right in with a lot of their other stuff. So I enjoyed it too. And again, the fact that the three of them had different plots, different ideas, you could essentially continue to do this ad infinitum because all you have to do is throw yokai monsters in the mix. And you can make up whatever story you want.
Right. As long as the yokai show up.
Right. They'll show up eventually. But a lot of the stuff is like more of a curse. Yeah. And like you said, with the Longwood Ghosts, in the beginning, it's because they spill blood. Then later on in the film, they go to like a grave site and they say you can't bring steel. So if you have swords or knives, that's forbidden. And obviously they do, and they pay the price as well. Right. So it's usually like a curse, like it's something you shouldn't have did, or something maybe you didn't do. You didn't complete the ritual. I mean, those are kind of some of the really small themes that work in, at least with these initial three films.
Yeah. Which brings us to the Great Yokai War from 2005. And if you had told me that Takashi Miike was going to make a children's film, I would have been like, really? Okay. This is the guy who did Happiness to the Katakuris and Audition and, Visitor Q. It's like, okay. But I think it's great. I think it's a great kids film. It's super action packed. It's a little long. It's about 2 hours long. And so that may be a little long to test some people's patience. But in terms of kind of capturing the spirit of those early yokai films, I thought he did a really nice job. What were your thoughts?
It's a little jarring. It was a little jarring for me to see it thrown into like modern times. I mean, again, you're talking from 1969 to 2005, so obviously a lot of time had gone on. And if you were to do something more contemporary, well, obviously this is how you're going to do it. So it took a little bit for me to wrap my head around it.
Agreed. We're not working with samurai and ronin. Like it's not feudal Japan.
And again, you have a child who is essentially the lead, in this film, where he becomes. They do the legend of the Kirin Rider, where he is like bestowed this like power, but he's obviously doesn't, at the beginning anyways, he doesn't understand what he's got or what he has to do. And for some other viewers, it might be like, well, this is kind of like a Lord of the Rings. I mean, it's almost like an epic adventure, but again, like you said, it's geared towards kids. So that was a little bit more of I had to wrap my head around it. And not only that, but the special effects. Yeah. You can still see it's in the early time of CGI. So some of it is not as convincing as it maybe could be. I mean, I do long for the guy in the suit kind of thing with some of this stuff. Yep. But again, it also allows for these gigantic armies of monsters, yokai monsters, to be thrown in these scenes where, again, you have like this epic, gigantic battle that just like, you couldn't do it back in the 60s. It just wouldn't work. So everything like with a lot of the more contemporary films, everything is like ratcheted up because of, the technology and things that they can do and so forth.
Well, and I thought it was a nice mix, actually, because we had some guys in suits, we have costumed actors, and then we have these CGI creatures. And, you know, like we had 100 monsters in the first film. This one we have like 1,000,000 monsters.
Yeah,
Like there's,
right.
and I was kind of amazed at how, you know, as you're glancing through, like each monster is different. Like it isn't
Right.
like you're just getting like, you know, here's a blue one, here's a green one. It's like, no, they're like, they all have these different intricacies and qualities. And I was like, this is kind of amazing, the production design on this. And I really like that. So basically the story is you've got this Kieran writer, our young hero, and he is forced to face off against like this evil demon who's looking over and trying to bring about the apocalypse, basically.
Right.
The demon keeps providing these like weird mechanical monsters, and they are this wonderful kind of like CGI stop motion. So they move completely differently than the yokai do, which I really thought was a nice touch.
Yeah, for me again, being as like off kilter as I am, it harkened me back to Luigi Cozzi doing the stuff in Hercules, where he decided to do these mechanical like Greek creature, you know, type thing. That's the first thing that jumped in my head. But like I said, that's just me being, you know, a twisted film fan. But
yeah, and I like we saw our Kappa come back. We saw our long neck woman. We saw a lot of the monsters that we'd see in the past, just different iterations of them.
Right, exactly.
And the war is epic. I mean, it is really a sweet. I had read somewhere that this was intended to be kind of like Japan's answer to Lord of the Rings, because it really is a sweeping, epic scope of it. You see the scene where like there's the battle happening here, and then all the yokai are like closing in around them, and they call it a festival, and there's kind of a joy around it. And it's like, you know, it's a war, but not really a war. Like it's like they're all just coming together, even though there is a battle. You know, there is a battle against the demon and his minions. On that disc, that third disc with Great Yokai War, there's this featurette that takes us inside the Great Yokai Conference, because apparently there was like that they've been doing this for like years, I guess, but they have like yokai, you know, conventions, and people dress up and cosplay, and you got to meet our Shigeru Mizuki, the guy who wrote the mangas originally. Takashi Miike was there, the screenwriter was there, and I thought it was interesting that the guy, and maybe not surprising, but one of the co-writers, the screenwriters, was a video game guy. So like we have Takashi Miike teaming up with a video game guy to basically come up with a story that pays homage to these yokai from before.
And I think that what that does is that kind of goes back to the documentary on the first disc, where they explain how this encompasses so many different aspects of essentially pop culture, especially with Japan, where it could seep in with the manga, with the video games, the TV shows, you know, playing cards, Pokemon, all that. It all encompasses the yokai. When you listen to them speak about how that influences the culture, it kind of starts to make sense.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, I can see where this pulls from that and this pulls from that. So it essentially covers all your areas, whatever it is, whatever form of media you want to have, are all tied into the yokai with the Japanese culture.
Which is amazing to me that, again, that we as Americans had not heard the term yokai, considering how kind of prevalent it is in our culture, or at least, you know, like we do have anime and we have, you know, manga, and you just think that like at some point somebody would have said yokai and would have caught on the way kaiju and tokusatsu have. You're like, okay, I know those terms, even if I'm not a kaiju fan, which I am, or you know, tokusatsu fan. It's like, why, you know, I'm so glad that Arrow put this box set out, because now I have a new term in my lexicon.
Yeah, me too. Exact same thing for me as well.
Cool. Well, thank you, Dave. It was great fun, and thank you for kind of going on the journey with me. It was nice to know that somebody was across state lines watching these movies with me. We're going to get back together and we'll do another one of these. In the meantime, keep exploring, keep searching, keep sharing the scare.